Welcome back to The Comfy Chairs, a podcast from 123 Limited. This is your host, Kate. It should come as no surprise to listeners of this podcast that anyone who is a self-proclaimed values geek is a welcome guest in The Comfy Chairs. So I'm excited to have Dr. Benjamin Ritter join me today for a conversation about the role values can play in increasing job satisfaction and reducing fear. I've talked about fear before and how the human brain is wired to look for threats so we can keep ourselves safe. Our fear and stress responses are a form of protection. But what if they are also a distraction? Something that prevents us from focusing on the people we want to be and become. Values serve many purposes for leaders. Today we're going to explore how knowing and weaving your values into your work can help you manage the feelings of fear or doubt that come along with leadership responsibilities. We'll also examine how values can turn your attention and energy to growing yourself and your team. Welcome to The Comfy Chairs, Ben. I'd like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself before we begin our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm feeling comfy. I'm sadly not in a chair, though. I am actually standing because it's that time of day.
It's so much better for you.
Yeah, except when you stand up and your back goes like crick and you're like, oh no, I need to sit down again.
Yeah. Are you at that age where you hurt yourself sleeping?
I hurt myself breathing. You know? Okay, so I'm not a clinician, even though I have the doctor in front of my name. I'm actually a doctor of organizational leadership, and my whole life is about helping people become fearless in their careers. I think we are way too reactive, and eventually we end up in a place where we feel stuck, unfulfilled, or just a little unsure on how to navigate our careers to lead to more fulfillment or success. And so I wrote a book called Becoming Fearless and work with clients one-on-one as well as large enterprise companies and helping organizations become places that people can fall in love with. But more importantly, I work with individuals to help them be able to create a career that they can truly be proud of.
You have said a couple of things that absolutely spark for me. The loving companies, the work that you're proud of. I think if you are not directly in a leadership role yourself, a formal leadership role, if you're there to support, if you can accomplish those things with and for people, there's really not any better work to be done. Thank you for mentioning your book. That's sort of where I want to start, not necessarily doing a book review or a book report, but using it as a springboard to talk about some of the concepts we want to discuss today. One of the things I really appreciated, because this is my own practice, admittedly, is that in those opening pages, you started by defining some really important terms. So it was clear what you were talking about and how they would be used throughout. That was feelings, thoughts, beliefs, and fear. I would love to have you walk us through your definition for each of these as a starting place, because they are very relevant to the conversation about values that we'll be having.
I remember I was working with a client one day and we started talking about feelings, thoughts, and beliefs, and we came up with the phrase to feel your feelings, think your thoughts, but don't believe your beliefs. And it became a t-shirt. And so we all just got to walk around with these t-shirts on. People like very confused by the don't believe your beliefs piece. But hopefully with these definitions and a little conversation, we can get maybe some of our learners sending me messages for some t-shirts.
What are you supposed to do with your beliefs if not believe them?
Oh, well, too often we live in fear because we believe our beliefs without any sort of questioning.
Okay.
And if we are not happy with where we are or not getting the results that we want, that's generally because we have beliefs that aren't in alignment with the goals that we have set for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so to find success, we generally have to question the programming that we have. And too often we don't. You know, that's where fear comes into play. Yeah. So and those beliefs are what they are because we've had a feeling in our past, which is an instinctive emotional reaction to your circumstances or specific situation influenced by what you think and believe about that emotion. So we have a feeling, our heart starts beating faster, or we have shortness of breath, or we feel our temperature raise, or we start sweating. And so we have a thought around that feeling. So thoughts are ideas and or opinions in your mind developed to understand or assess something, influenced by what you feel and believe about those things. So again, we're not in a vacuum. It's kind of, we think of it as a cycle, but it's kind of, you're just bouncing all over the place.
Yeah.
And then our beliefs are what you accept as truth. So it's a thought that you have over and over and over again about a feeling that you eventually decide that is going to become a truth within your mind. So, for example, you're in a meeting, you're a little nervous, you have an idea, you may be a little excited at the same time too. You think you should share it because you're valued and you're new in an organization. You share it. The leader goes, that's silly, and moves on.
Yeah.
So now you have a thought that you were dismissed. Generally, that is so impactful that you don't need to have more than one experience with that specific situation. You just start believing that you're dismissed. No one wants to hear your opinions. And so you become afraid of sharing your opinions. And now you have a new action that's controlling you in the work environment. And so generally we get caught in this kind of negative spiral where we have beliefs that aren't serving us. We feel fear that accompanies those negative beliefs, and we are held back from taking action towards our own goals because of the inner world that we've created based on a couple experiences.
You've managed to really beautifully weave in the definitions for feelings, thoughts, and beliefs there. Can you define fear a little explicitly for us, please?
It kind of depends on how we want to interpret it. For me,
Yes.
I would love fear to be just information. Done. So in the book, fear is a feeling defined by your thoughts, supported by a belief that something is dangerous or a threat. So generally we connect fear with bad, but fear, if we want to work towards becoming fearless, needs to just be whatever information that we are perceiving from our external environment.
Yeah.
If we can,
go ahead. No, please go ahead.
If we can do that, then there is no fear, because it is good sometimes to be like, oh, I shouldn't go into the cage in the zoo. Like, I should not go feed the tiger. It's a bad idea.
Yes.
I shouldn't. Now, oh no, there's a baby in the tiger cage. Someone first pull up Instagram and record me. I should go save the baby now. And so I feel fear, and I go, oh, but that fear does not control me. It's I should be afraid. Save the baby. Don't stay in the cage very long.
One of the things I wrote down as I was processing what you're saying is that feeling is a story. That it's the story we tell ourselves about those environments and those environmental triggers that we have. And I really I hear that we continue to tell stories based on that feeling, that the feeling triggers thought, which is putting words to the story as opposed to a reaction. Beliefs become the story we tell ourselves repeatedly, and that fear is kind of a signpost along the way of that storytelling. And I really appreciate thinking of fear as information. This is a data point that is telling me something about what I'm experiencing, rather than being the thing that I have to be or do. I would like to add values to the list of the terms that we're defining, because that is, you're a values geek, which I love, and the role of values in leadership and just being a generally good human is an important conversation for us to have. So when we talk about values, what is it that we mean?
Yeah, and I'm going to get to values in 1 second, because I think it's important to also state that we tend to try to reinforce thoughts or beliefs that we have in a negative way. So we have this feeling of our environment. We start telling ourselves a story with the thought, and then we try to go prove that thought. And so if the thought is, this is bad, this is dangerous, or they don't love me, or I don't deserve a promotion, we don't tend to be our champion. We tend to go, oh no, find out reasons why this is true so I can believe it more fully and I should be afraid. Instead of, we place, and this is where I get the values, we place our values or our goals ahead of our fears. So fear is just information on the path to our success and to our goals and to our greatness and towards fulfillment, and towards meaning, whatever we want to say. And values are the foundation of what we truly are living for. We create goals from our values, we create actions, we create relationships from our values. They become our perspective of the world that we want, or they become the kind of divvying rod, the divining rod to the world that we want to create for ourselves. They are our principles. They are the qualities that, because they can be aspirational, the qualities that we aspire towards. They are the attitudes and beliefs that we hold dear. And for example, my number one value is health. And health for me, though, can be broken up to many different pillars. So mental, spiritual, physical, emotional. And those pillars each have their own definition for me specifically, but also that definition can change based on what I'm experiencing in my life. We've been using big words like thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, fear, values. None of those words actually matter other than how we define them for whatever point we are in our life. And so we should also pick definitions that serve us. So keeping in mind, when we use big words like I'm afraid of that, if we don't get granular and don't get detailed, we get stuck in the fear. One of the easiest ways to actually come up with some sort of action or some sort of understanding of self and what we need to do is to get very specific and get very defined. And very often with values too, people just say, oh, my value is health. And so I eat healthy and I go to the gym and I work in industries that are healthy. Well, we have to get more specific than that if we want to actually create a filter and for our own actions and to be more intentional and to understand what we should focus on over things like fear or negative beliefs.
It's a root cause analysis almost, isn't it?
You can see my healthcare background.
Yeah, I can. Definitely.
Let's do an RCA.
I was going to say, let's do an RCA here. Let's ask the 5 whys, which I think is such an applicable tool across so many circumstances. You know, I value health. All right, well, why? Whatever the answer is. Why? And not to be the annoying toddler repeating why, but to help that person or yourself in this case, to be able to drill down and get to that clear point of this matters to me for this specific reason. Yeah.
If you can get behind your values in terms of, no, I really do believe in this. And so people tend to not be confident in themselves and to live in fear because they haven't actually fully accepted what they stand for. And so when I work with clients through the framework of self-leadership, we initially focus on clarity. And it's clarity of self and clarity of goals.
Yeah.
Clarity of self involves what your values are, remembering your stories and your milestones and your failures and the things that really defined who you are today. And then figuring out that who you were before doesn't have to mean who you are going to be, but so then figuring out, well, who do you want to be and what's at the core of that in terms of what you stand for and how you want to show up in a room. You know, silly words like what are your superpowers or what do you care most about or what gets you excited? Like those are important questions.
They are.
And those answers can change over time. But for me, it's like, well, how did I want to work my value? How did I want to create a professional career through it? And through my own career audit and my own exploration, that health, what mattered to me in terms of how I wanted to impact the world, became creating less toxic environments, so more empowering environments for people to work in, and to make sure that the people, the employee, the worker, felt accountable for their own success and empowered to create it. Because those aspects of health mattered a lot to me when I was in my own career. And so I created this path in that direction. It's not to say, though, that that path doesn't maybe change because the initial focus was on actually nutrition and food policy. And so maybe in the future, once I hit a certain pinnacle or milestone here, I go, I want to go get involved in this again. Nothing's wrong with my past career or my past goals. I'm still living my values, but the goals can change.
Mm-hmm. I'm having a lot of like, I want to stand up and cheer moments, Ben. Clarity is, I think, the foundational, the primary, absolutely necessary leadership competency. And that's leadership with a formal title, but also, am I leading myself? Self-leadership you mentioned. And am I doing acts of leadership with my family, my colleagues, my community, whatever that is, starting with, I think, clarity of purpose. And values could be another way to talk about that. To your point, we have our 25-cent buzzy fancy words, but what do we mean when we say that? And getting very clear with yourself, and if you lead people, then with your team, about this is why we're here, this is what we do, this is how we do it. You've just established a bedrock, a solid foundation that's going to make every type of challenge surmountable, every type of goal practically achievable. And go ahead.
I was gonna say, did you ever have a thing you were known for? You were in a meeting and there's just things that you always asked and always were interested in, and people knew to expect that from you when it came to managing a project or dealing with people or anything like that?
Kind of. I can think of in my misspent youth, there were a couple of questions that I was known for asking. And as I got older, approaches and techniques. One of the people I partner with for work these days, we were talking about a team retreat agenda today, and I started asking her a question. She's like, I heard you asking me this when I was planning. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes. Short answer, yes.
Mm-hmm. And so and I bring that up just because true leadership, executive presence, it kind of is part of clarity. Just it's our vision. It's who you are and what do you stand for, and how does that come out in terms of how you lead and show up in the workplace. And I had generally two main things I always was curious about in a project. It was, how are we taking care of our people? So the employees, and I'd always ask questions or bring up topics about, like, no matter who was in the room, how this was going to impact our people, what the timeline was like, what pressures they're dealing with, what the positive outcome will be for them. And then overall, like, why are we doing this? What's the core reason? Kind of like an ROI analysis on tasks and projects. And it just was part of my brand. It's part of who I was. It attached to my values. And when people can expect that from you, and there is something you do, even if you're not aware of it, listener, when you know what that is and you're intentional about it, you can have a little bit more control over your brand within the workplace, and hopefully it comes from your values. Hopefully it's part of who you truly are.
So you said even if we're not aware of it, something that I've been thinking about a lot the last 2 years that I would love to be able to codify and provide is a template, a framework, a thing to help younger leaders or early career leaders, age isn't necessarily a defining factor here, who maybe haven't had the opportunity yet, but recognize the importance of it, to help them define their own values. There are a lot of systems out there. I way back in the day took a Franklin Covey planner course that had you go through a values exercise, but putting it in that leadership context, it for me seems like a good thing to offer. But all of this rambling to get to, if, say, I was a newer leader or somebody who has recognized, I don't want my values to be happenstance. I want to have purpose and intent with those. Is there a process or steps that you would recommend someone follow?
Yeah, and if you're doing this on your own, be okay with not being completely happy with the result
Thank you.
initially, and just come back to it a week later and a month later and
Mm-hmm.
3 months later and do it again. There's a lot of assessments online where you just pick words or circle them or pick cards. And those are
Mm-hmm.
okay. Like they're not bad. There's the Hogan assessment. You can do the MVPI, which is like a values assessment. But I actually prefer to take a more personal route,
Mm-hmm.
and with a little caveat to say, as you live your life, things will become more clear and more important to you,
Thank you.
or less
Yes.
important to you. So
Yeah.
if you're early on in your career, expect to be more leaning into the value of curiosity and more so just in terms of your approach and than anything else. So I recommend clients explore, define, and then align. So
Okay.
first, the exploration portion actually involves reviewing your 5 most happy and least happy memories that you have.
Hmm.
Early on in your career, you can do personal, and if you don't have as many professional, but generally I want these to be in some way, shape, or form related to your professional life. And then maybe throw in 1 or 2 personal, but majorly professional. And really get detailed about what happened, what the different components were in those memories and experiences. And then once you've written all that down, go back, read what you wrote, add details if you now remember more, and then look for themes.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you then summarize those memories into a phrase or a keyword on what was most important about those happy memories? And what was the opposite? What was the thing you were trying, what you like to avoid from those sad memories, from those
Mm-hmm.
difficult times? And then you're going to be left with just a jumbled mess of phrases and keywords
Yes.
that you can then look at and take stuff out if you want, add more if you want, but generally then ask yourself the question, who do I want to be and who am I? So you can ask yourself 2 different questions, and then you have now a great starting point to build a couple more phrases or different keywords. It's a
Mm-hmm.
great opportunity for uh, maybe aspirational value, something that you really kind of wish you were more of. And I think we can aspire to be anything we'd like to be. It just becomes maybe a little bit harder when we initially start working on it. But then you have your list, and then you start prioritizing. So you maybe cut it down to your top 20, and then you start asking yourself, well, if I can have this value but nothing else, would that be okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you find the one value that you would want above all else that you think is the most important, and that becomes number 1. And you do that for generally, I recommend about three
Yes.
values.
You took the
Anything
words right out of
more,
my mouth.
it gets a little overwhelming and confusing. And also, as you saw with my health value, it's actually there's multiple components to it.
Yes.
And if you have one value in your life that you are able to live fully, like you probably pretty great, probably pretty
Mm-hmm.
on point. My second value I actually recently changed. So it was interesting. It used to be trust,
Okay.
and like it was like trust, openness, honesty, and it recently became magic.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so that moved up the list because that can happen. But one word can have so many different meanings, and so magic for me relates to finding, remembering, and finding and creating meaning in every experience, no matter how mundane, and knowing that there just because there's more doesn't mean that your current moment is less, because it's always connected to
Mm-hmm.
whatever is more. Because I was personally realizing that this phase in my life, that is so crucial to me being motivated and showing up and doing new things and how I want to live my life. Okay, so that was a little off track. So now that you have this prioritized
Excellent.
list of your top 3 values, now you have to define them,
Mm-hmm.
which is, I think, the bulk of the work, which is, what does this mean for me personally? What does this mean for me professionally? What does it mean for me, for my friends? What does this mean? And so like you come up with all these different definitions, so you understand the value, because we need to connect
Mm-hmm.
your life to the value. what behaviors represent the value, what behaviors don't, go against the value. And then when you have that when you have these definitions of these three, you then can start doing some assessments. You can assess your relationships, you can assess your job, you can assess yourself, how you show up, and find opportunities to take actions and improve your life. And when you have this list and you have these actions and you kind of know it so clearly, you end up becoming more confident, and the things you're afraid of tend to lose importance because you're like, oh, this is important. So it's the thing that you feel is most important generally gets your attention and your energy, or you're more likely to take action on it, which is what we want to do in comparison to fear. We want to minimize fear.
Yeah.
Raise the importance of your values.
Well, we talk about beliefs, and there's the thing I continue to think about, the thing I have created as a truth about myself or my world. So you're defining it. Then we also have kind of those more aspirational beliefs. What do I believe about my work, the people around me, myself? Beliefs and values without action are nothing. If we are not acting on them in some way, and I'm talking more aspirationally, ideally, but even beliefs that we are reacting to fear, if I'm not acting on those, it's not a thing. It doesn't have space in the real world. It's the action bringing it to life that matters. And at least for my part, what I want is to help people define the beliefs, the values, the things that matter to them, that they want to take action to make things better for themselves and others. By my lights, I think that is a corollary or a parallel to wanting to help people become fearless.
Mm-hmm.
I want to, if I may, I want to add a couple of practical options to that values exercise. I'm just thinking about how folks process information, how they approach things, the fear of the blank page that some people can encounter. And one place to start that maybe isn't so qualitative or linguistic based is doing a calendar audit. How are you spending your time? Just like we say, where you spend your money shows you what matters to you. Where you spend your time shows what's important. Mm-hmm. And that lets you understand, I'm putting time into these things. And to your point of positive and negative, you can use that experiential kind of audit, if you will, to evaluate where do I have energy, what excites me and engages me, and where do I have dread or find that I'm drained from doing it. If I'm spending all of my time driving around from meeting to meeting, and I'm exhausted, I don't feel connected, what have you, well, that tells me something about what's important to me. So that can be another way to get to that place where you have a slate of things to consider. I also really appreciated the fact that you went back to the let's define, if you identify that health, that magic is important to you, what do you mean by that? And it can be a meaning that you just have for yourself. I'm going to take that back, actually. I do think you need to be able to speak it out into the world and talk about it in ways that other people can understand, so that you're bringing some form to it.
One of the easiest ways to get rid of fear is to take it out of your head.
Mm-hmm.
And the greatest example is, I don't know if you ever experienced this. You're angry about something. I can't believe Jody did that thing. And you're sitting in it all day and you're fuming. And you have the chance to tell your partner or friend later that night, I gotta talk to them. And you're sitting there and you're like, I can't believe Jody signed her email best wishes. And you're like, wait a second, hold on. Like, it sounded a lot more passive aggressive in my head.
Mm-hmm.
or whatever it was. But you say it out loud and you're like, oh, wait, hold on. You like you deflate the balloon, or you sleep on it
Mm-hmm.
and your brain has time to process. It's sometimes I feel like it's because it is a survival instinct. We are immediately on the defensive, especially depending on what experiences you've had in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so our fear rules us because it's what has kept us safe. But a lot of times, to get rid of the fear, we have to get it out of our own heads and stop magnifying the issues. And I know we were talking about values, but for some reason that came to mind.
This is a little cliche, but when we name things, it gives us power over them. And that doesn't have to be manipulative power, it can be understanding, or back to our earlier point, clarity.
Mm-hmm.
I know from reading your various profiles that you did your doctoral studies on kind of the intersection between values and job satisfaction. And we've talked a little bit, I think. We've kind of danced around that, but I'd like to understand a little more explicitly what you learned in those studies. What?
Yeah, and
Oh, go ahead. No, sorry.
yeah, please go on.
No, I was asking a overly complex question. I asked my
I like,
question. I will stop now.
I like complexity, but I'll respect that. Yeah, I wanted to actually start talking about job satisfaction when you started sharing about the calendar audit. Because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of what I do outside of value alignment is helping an individual take more control over their job and their career.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, that relates to different aspects of job satisfaction. And combining the two in my research, I actually found some things that I was not expecting. And I'll go over the research and then kind of say what I believe. So, with healthcare leaders, they're highly value driven and oriented. And so, as expected, they had a very high ratio of alignment of their personal and job values in terms of just like their overall belief about work.
Mm-hmm.
So they thought that their job aligned with their personal values. Awesome. Great. Did that relate to job satisfaction? Well, it didn't seem to increase job satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
They had high levels of intrinsic, so as expected, they were very well satisfied in that category. But it seemed that the alignment of values and job, like person job values alignment, led to a greater need for extrinsic job satisfaction.
Oh.
So they actually put more value then on, and extrinsic is also recognition. So recognition and compensation.
Yeah, this is interesting. This follows. Please continue.
Yeah. So there were some very interesting findings around value differences between male and female leaders, because that's how we identified the information, which I think needs some further study. But for values themselves, I was like, oh, all aspects of job satisfaction are important, and you can't get by with only focusing on one. Maybe you can find employees that care less. Maybe they're going to be more, I'm going to make a generalization, maybe they'll be more in the nonprofit realm.
Mm.
But I know a lot of healthcare leaders that are trying to maximize their extrinsic benefits and compensation in comparison, as well as their intrinsic motivators, which they do get to maximize because of the industry that they're in, if they prioritize it.
Human motivation it's so slippery at the end of the day. We can talk about mastery, autonomy, purpose, the classic Dan Pink model, but it does just slide around from person to person. And it can be so unexpected what shows up as what motivates, what satisfies, what inspires. It's kind of amazing that we're able to have any commonality sometimes.
And that's where I think I focus very heavily on personal autonomy
Mm-hmm.
and empowerment and accountability when it comes to job satisfaction.
Yeah.
I gave a workshop many times, maybe about once a week when I first launched this business, called "Craft the Job You Love from a Job You Have," and I don't do that anymore. But it was all about taking your current job and making it your
Mm-hmm.
own, making it really matter to you. And we all have the ability to do that in different ways. But job satisfaction, no matter what your motivators are, you when you can figure them out and then craft your job to be best fit. So you can focus
Mm-hmm.
on the actual work, on the social relationships, and the meaning behind your work. Those generally are the three main categories. I like to expand that to what do you want to learn? So future
Mm-hmm.
work and challenges, and just to make sure that that's included. Because if you don't have that, a very large percentage of the population will get bored and will feel
Mm-hmm.
stuck and won't feel like they're going anywhere. Not everybody, but some. And that then you can then, it doesn't take into account like compensation and stuff. But in general, like if you can job craft in those main categories and you're properly compensated, you can make almost any home a great home. Uh,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Disclaimer: without toxic leadership. So,
Well,
because when the house is burning, you're not worried about you're not worried about making sure everything's in order. You're looking
or
to
the
get
cushions facing the way
Yeah.
I want them to. Job crafting is another really interesting topic. It is a tool for employees and it's a tool for leaders as well. And being able to sort of straddle the helping people understand how they're empowered to do some of that for themselves, whether it's through mindsets or when practicable through tweaks and modifications in their jobs, is a great way to just get folks engaged in how they are working. I think leaders need to be more skilled in understanding how they can make use of crafting jobs, both with their people and creating the freedom of that
Yeah.
for their folks and what that can mean. And if you say you value things like respect, integrity, excellence, whether that's a company value or a personal value, you're saying that you value people having the opportunities to demonstrate those, and job crafting is a really good playground for that.
Yeah, I'm happy that you called out it's not as straightforward as it sounds,
Mhm.
because most of the people that I work with generally can't see the solutions because of fear,
Mhm.
because of beliefs that they have. And generally we're so in the work that we don't realize that there are so many different ways to do the work.
Yeah.
And that's where a coach can come into play, or a manager that can sit down with the employee and say, let's talk about these areas.
Mhm.
What would make your work easier? There's certain resources that I can provide. You working remote? How's your home office? You working in office? How's your in office?
Or even, hey, you seem to be really steady right now. Do you need more challenge?
Mm-hmm.
How can we add more exciting challenge to this to help you, really sink your teeth in? Maybe another approach. Something I said in the introduction, I want to kind of pull in, and you talked about this too, that fear's not a bad thing. It's information. The feelings, the thoughts, the beliefs, the fear that can run alongside or be generated by those, that is our mind, our body's way of protecting us, of keeping us safe. So it's protection, but sometimes fear is simply a distraction. And this probably fits into this idea of it's information for us to process and make a decision about. But do we really have to be fearless, or is it about where I turn my focus? Does that make sense outside of my head?
I think the question is fearless the goal, or is the reinterpretation of fear the goal?
Maybe. Maybe that's what I mean. Yeah.
Feel free to add some more for me.
So kind of here's what I'm thinking, that I keep getting, when I think about fear, I tend to orbit that idea of feel the fear and do it anyway,
Mm-hmm.
because fear is part of being human because of how we're wired. And I can't necessarily control my fear, but I can make choices about how I respond,
Mm-hmm.
the actions I choose. So for my part, and it may be that we're actually talking about the same thing, but the language is different. For my part, I prioritize, am I able to function with the fear? Am I able to focus on the right, quote unquote, right things? And in this space, how I want to be in the world. I prioritize that over fearlessness. And this may be just a semantic discussion.
Well, it's also the definition of fearlessness. It's the belief, or at least what I've heard from the public, fearlessness is the absence of fear. That's not what we're talking about.
Okay.
We are, at least the idea of becoming fearless is by hopefully redefining that fear is not something that you have to overcome.
Okay.
But it's something that you can pay attention to and then interpret in a way that serves you. And if we could totally change the word of fear to something else, I would love to. If we could, what is that? The belief that you get that something is scary or something is not good for you? I don't know. Can we just change the word?
Yeah.
And then yes, we want to pick a new action, but it's less in my mind and how I would love fear to be interpreted. It's less about overcoming it, and it's more about realizing that it doesn't matter. It's actually a logical discussion with yourself to say, oh, okay, I feel this thing right now. I'm thinking about it. Well, I have this belief around it. It feels like I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't jump out of the plane. Jumping out of the plane is scary. Well, why am I here on this plane right now? Why do I want to jump out of it? And oh, it's because it's an experience I want to have. It's an adventure. It feeds my soul. I'm doing this with my partner, and it's creating a great bond with us. And it's on my bucket list. It's really important to me. Whatever it is, it's an accomplishment. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, jump. And so fear is a data point that we don't have to ignore or push away. It's more so to say, oh yeah, okay, good point. But not all the information that I actually think is important right now. Let's look at the other information that we have and then make a decision that serves us.
This has me thinking that something we can focus on in terms of skill development to help people with this is critical thinking. Being able to go through that process. We joked about doing a root cause analysis in RCA, but thinking about the eventualities and the possibilities and being able to discern fear versus threat, essentially. Like, is this really something that will cause me harm or someone else harm? Or is it a feeling generated by a thought based on external stimuli? That there are actionable things we can do, but if we can also help with how people think, how we learn and process, that there's an opportunity to make fearlessness more readily available to us when we need it.
Mm-hmm. And so generally you come up with some sort of decision-making tree. He's mentioned the critical thinking process to say, okay, so I know that my instincts aren't exactly where I want them to be right now. So I need to give myself a process to be able to work through situations that I'm afraid of. And so generally a coach can be really helpful there, but for listeners, it's what areas are you afraid of? Probably got a bunch. Pick the one that is the least scary right now, not the most, the least, because a win is a win.
Start small.
Start small. And then even we break that even down further and we figure out what's the smallest action you can take to start building some confidence around this area. And so generally a lot of my solutions, especially in coaching, that deal with, conflict or a fear of judgment or loss, like even like a negotiation is a fair example. I am helping a client negotiate right now. It's turning the situation into not a me against them, but an us. So how do you negotiate? You make it about an us. Great. I know I really want to work here. I'm really excited. I can't believe I can't wait to start this position. And what range do you think we can get to? Like, let's work together here. I want to make this easy for you. Great. Like, what's the process for going back and getting approval? Like, what do you need from me? And you're not pushing, you're not convincing, you're not influencing, you're partnering. And a lot of things in life, especially with our manager, like, great, I'm really interested in this promotion next year, not next week, next year. How do I make this easier for you? Like, what are the goals that I need to hit? How do I make sure that I'm still doing my work, but also maybe kind of stretching and hitting the other opportunities? And so you're partnering instead of thinking that you're kind of doing something wrong. And whenever you use someone as a mentor or a teammate, you're also then kind of bringing them on. You're doing something a little bit more in terms of relationship building and creating rapport. When you are on the same team, people are generally going to treat you like you're on the same team and try to help you too.
Yeah. We talked about job crafting earlier. We talked about job crafting. But this is also this function of team crafting too. That obviously you have the team that you're assigned to, but I don't want to say curating because that can seem a little Machiavellian, but for lack of a better word in the moment, are you curating the relationships around you that are going to help you get your heart and your mind in line with how you're trying to be? So, does that make sense?
We leave way too many things up to chance.
Yes.
And as a leader, team crafting, actually led a workshop called the team model of managing to motivate, which was similar to job crafting, but for the team. So I love that you brought that up. It included trust, though. Trust is the foundation. How do you build trust first on a team before you start crafting the environment, the actual work, and the meaning behind the work? But yeah, you have to not wing it when you're leading people, and try to encourage others to give you the answers that you are trying so hard to figure out. And people want to help you.
And we've talked a little bit about self-leadership, and I think trust applies there, very much there as well. That if I'm leading myself, I have to trust myself as well. And starting with what's important to me, what matters, what do I value, knowing, frankly, just building self-awareness, knowing what I'm good at, knowing what I'm not good at, and being clear about who I am and what I think and believe in the world. That lets you trust yourself so that you can lead yourself.
The foundation of confidence is actually knowing what you stand for. Get the question a lot. How do you feel comfortable when you're networking? I'm so worried about what people think about me. What do you think about yourself? And that is the key to self-leadership and to confidence and to being able to show up intentionally. And for people that don't know who they are and they're early in their career and they're lost, well, you know what clarity is? Clarity also is accepting that you don't know.
Yes.
I spent 4 or 5 years of my life just getting curious about things, not having any attachment to the outcome or where I was going to hang out. And that worked until I realized that I had enough information to figure out what I wanted to do. And then I started feeling stuck again because I wasn't doing the things that I actually cared about.
I do want to acknowledge that having the ability, whatever that looks like, to take 4 or 5 years to not care is a form of privilege, but there are ways to do that at many scales too. Yeah, I don't want to get off on a horrible tangent there, but I think about people early in their career with less experience that maybe there are financial restrictions when you're early in your working life. And some of what we're talking about does take time and does carry a certain amount of risk. If I try to make a significant change professionally, what does that mean for my paycheck, my bank account? And you may choose, because of things that are important to you that you value, to defer some of the things that we're talking about. But even that, I think, is facing your fear and making choices that allow you to function in a fearless fashion.
A lot of people are worried about making a decision because it means that they can't make other decisions.
Yes.
And it is real and it is true. Everything you decide to dedicate your time to means that you're not dedicating your time to something else. 100%.
Yeah.
Does it mean you can never do that thing? No. Just means that you're making the choice now to do something else. But if you don't make that decision, then you're probably not going to get a lot of results because you're going to be stuck in indecision.
I have been spending some time studying Mr. Rogers recently, because apparently I'm 5 years old, and so I want to enjoy Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. But the fact of the matter is, this was a kind, insightful man that did a lot of good in the world and was able to reflect a lot on things like values and care and kindness, and feelings of inferiority and insecurity as well. I spent some time doing a reflection this week on a quote from him talking about hesitating before he begins a project, because he's concerned that it's not going to be as good as he feels it can be when the idea first came to him. And then understanding, like, hey, I can do the best that I can do on this, and I need to decide for the present that I'm just going to accept the ambiguities that come with moving forward. And it's the decide for the present is so important, because very little that we choose to do is set in stone, particularly the type of decisions that we're talking about. Yeah. Those are not lifetime commitments necessarily. And releasing that fear of the wrong choice and giving yourself permission to make a choice that may require additional choices, it's so freeing. It just really is.
Reflect back on all the first times I've done things, and I'm really good at doing things for the first time now, because I've learned that there's nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah.
Because the second time I do it, it's always going to be better. And so is the third time, and the fourth time, and the fifth time. but you got to do it the first time.
Mm-hmm.
You got to get the crud out of the way.
Yeah.
So that's going to lead to new opportunities and growth.
Yeah. Well, and hey, guess what? Even if the second or third time are not as good, you're still learning throughout that process. And I think that's one of the chief ends of our lives, is to learn, add knowledge, share it with other people, and keep growing. Ben, I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I'm also clock watching and see that we're coming to the end of time, and I want to be respectful of that. I like to typically end asking folks to share any kind of big ideas or key takeaways that they may have from the discussion. And I do want to make certain that you have a chance to tell us a little bit more about your book as well.
I think if I was just to summarize a little bit, so you are the most important leader in your life, and what that means is you hold dear some values, some principles that are important to how you want to show up and how you want to act. And that is so much more important than the doubts or the fears. Because eventually when you start acting towards what you want to, who you want to be and what you want to create, you start molding the environment, actually. Maybe there is some disruption in the beginning. Maybe you lose some friends. Maybe you leave a job. But whatever it is, eventually you end up creating this lovely little ecosystem that aligns to your values and how you want to live your life. And hey, if more people create their own little bubbles and ecosystems, and we got a lot of people living and working fearlessly, and it's ultimately just going to create better organizations, better jobs, and a better world. Start small.
I'm going to boldly add on, when you talk about creating a better world, if we reduce our fear in any way, shape, or form, it gives us more space for kindness for ourselves and for others. And yeah, that is about making a better place. Thank you so much, Ben. Really appreciated your insights and having the chance to learn with and from you.
Thank you for having me on for this lovely, comfy chat.
Oh, your book, before I forget.
Yeah.
So I'm going to provide a link to it in the show notes. Is there this is the thing I want you to know about my book, and why you believe it was a book that needed to be in the world?
Yeah, well, everything comes down to fear. I mean, when I say everything, meaning the blockages, people not doing the things that truly matter to them, comes down to them believing that there's something in the way or some reason why they shouldn't. And when I look back on all my clients and these concepts of self-leadership, it all came down to someone not believing themselves enough, or not being clear in what they want to do, and really just being controlled by fear. And that's really sad, to see someone know what they want to create in their life and to feel like they can't do it because of an emotion, because of a belief, not because of anything outside of themselves. And yes, there are extenuating circumstances, or people just have different options available to them, but there is something we generally can do that's different, that's greater than our fear. So I wrote the book to hopefully give people 65 different strategies to, at least one of them is going to resonate with you, where you're dealing with fear in your life, where you can take some action. The book is not just a bunch of words and data. It's just, hey, this is what you're dealing with. Does that sound right? Awesome. Want to change it? Here's something you can do. Yeah, because that's how I learn. And when I was growing in my own professional and personal life, and still am every day, I would find the thing I wanted to work through, and I would take a little action. And then I would reflect on that action. What happened? How did I feel? What was the result? What do I want to do next time? Then I would take another action. And little by little, I started building this sense of confidence and understanding and fearlessness that I hope the book creates through its strategies and through its format.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for joining me in the comfy chairs. If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it with others who are passionate about leading and learning. And don't forget, if you have a question for our new Comfy HQ series, I'd love to hear it. Check out the link in the show notes to submit your question and be part of the conversation. Until next time.